People often talk about stances as being fixed points in time. The word stance implies that. The stances aren't fixed points at all. They're positions you pass through. They're like snapshots, moments in time. And there actually are no stances as such. There actually are. They're preparatory stances ones, where you're facing an opponent and you're essentially squaring off. That actually happens very rarely in civilian defense. But if you look at martial arts, martial form, traditional martial form, you can actually start to see that everything blends. There are extremes of movements, of expansion and contraction. And I'm going to start with kind of the most basic stance, which is not at all a stance. In karate, this is known as busubirachi. But it's basically just your standing to attention stance. And the simplest stances from there begin to expand out. So what we have here is the chicken stance. Now, this doesn't look like much, but all it is by simply lifting one leg to there, I've now created what is a one-legged posture. I put my weight, just by lifting that heel, I've already taken the weight onto one leg. And what this does is it single weights you. The idea is it's part of a movement, so you're stepping out. So this is your first step. Now notice how my foot is parallel to the ground, because the moment you're here and you push off, if you want to keep your toes down, well, that's kind of fine if you're doing an hiza in a Japanese karate, they call it hizageri, okay? But if you're pushing off to do anything, you're very unwise to, after that initial push off, do anything other than pick it up. So it actually picks up as soon as you're here in traditional Chinese martial arts, parallel to the ground. From there it's going to go out, and so the first stance you find is still on the center line, in line with the middle of that foot. This is stuck there, is your cat stance. So here, we're stretching out to there, in one line. From there, we can extend it just a bit to this position, which is your shingi stance. It's the spear stance, and this is one of those rare stances which you actually have something to fight with. And this stance was very used in real combat by soldiers with spears throughout history. So this is your basic stance. What is it? It's kind of like a boxing stance, but with the weight back. Why back? Because when you're fighting with a weapon like a spear, it's really useful not to be overcommitted. Or even 50-50, but you know from there the weight goes 50-50. And it's a precursor to the next step. You notice how it's gone about foot width. There's a foot between my heels. From there, and parallel to this, if you turn it slightly sideways, as you have of karate's kokutsurachi. But this is not. This is essentially Janbu, Sanjan, 3 battles. This is, I believe, the precursor to a slightly shorter version, which became this in Okinawa. So all stances essentially emanate from here. So this is kind of a central point. You can go back to here or there, and you can go from there to there. Notice how it's now width of your shoulders, and it's your gonbu or zenkutsurachi, forward stance. And from there you can actually adjust, or from here you can adjust into a number of other stances. For instance, you can adjust sideways. So from the battle stance, you can adjust sideways into your kiburachi in Japanese, or mabu. On the other hand, if you adjust your hips just slightly and turn that foot and turn that foot, you have a stance that's oriented this way, sumo. So whenever you're doing something directly forwards and you have to oppose with weight, this is that. If you want it to be side on, move sideways, yeah? That concept allows you to move sideways by not being this way. This is very hard to move from what they call a shikurachi. So those are your basic stances. Every other stance you can get is kind of a transition between those central points. So for example, you might get twisted stances, and they might be okay, or what's this for? Why would you drop the weight? If, for instance, Anders grabbed me, he's punching with the other hand, notice I can pull that, I can smash, this occurs, yeah? So I'm snatching that up, and at the same time I want to drop. If I want to push into there, and it will simply dive on my legs, I'm gone. Go from this side. If I go in there, up. But there's a way around it, and it actually does work. You can't dive. And this is often used, this is often used in Chinese martial arts. And it's not necessarily just a technique, it's also to get the flexibility, to get other concepts like here, could just as well be here, but you're shifting weight back just slightly. And you have this kicking drill that we've often done. Yeah. So from there, as Andrew kicks, so you've got a cat stance that can move forwards or back. Slight movement back, hips move just a little, takes you just out of range of the kick. You're just going to land there. Oh. Instead, there, and I just slip it. Most traditional stances are movements you've made offline to help deflections or to attack. So you have movements offline, say punches, yeah, or just to deflect. And we've been discussing lately how this is quite useful. So combined stances, traditional stances, which are moments in time, so your kicks, or your kicks, and combine it with a deflection, because on its own, please don't hit me, I'm going to just move it. It's not quite enough movement, but it's enough to help me get the deflection to work. Deflections work at a bit of a range. So if we just tied each other to this sort of distance with belts, this is very hard to deflect. You need a bit of movement, you need a bit of evasion. So the evasion is a necessary component.